Welcome, everyone. If you see the excitement in my face or you hear the excitement in my voice, it is because I'm excited about this episode. Jason, we're going to have one of those episodes today that is just going to fly by because it's going to be fun. We're going to be fantasizing a little bit here. Would you like to reveal what today's topic is?
Today's topic is something I know you've been wanting to talk about for a long time, and that is if you could have any type of aquarium, if you could build it from scratch, how would you do it? What would you do? It is basically your quintessential fantasy aquarium. And that is what we're going to talk about today. John's got his opinions. I've got something in my brain. If you could only have one, what would it look like? What would it be like when you walk into the room? What's this bad boy going to be?
There is a stipulation, though. We discussed this prior to clicking the record button, and that stipulation is we need to be realistic here. We need to have, this is an aquarium that we would be proud to have in our living room. I think both of us would like to go to the fish gallery in Dallas, Texas, and pull that 20-foot tank out, 4,500 gallons, and put that into our basement or our fish house. We're not talking about that. That's for the episode where we win the lottery. Okay, you win the lottery, you have all the money. I'm talking realistic. This is the kind of thing where you don't have to take out a second mortgage to get something like this. Mine is going to be a rather expensive setup. I'm sure yours would be too, but it's still real. It's within reach of most people, and it's going to be fun. I do want to address something though, before we get into the topic, and that is for our YouTube viewers, which we're still to the point where more people consume this on YouTube than they do the audio podcast. That's okay. I want to make all of you aware that Lisa and I are going to be having a major addition to our property and our setup here very soon. Fiber internet is being installed on our street as we speak. In fact, if you see me go like this during the stream or during the podcast, it's because I thought I saw a white truck drive by, because they're literally out there working as we speak, putting in the system. So hopefully the blinking and the freezing, which it's almost exclusively Jason that freezes up, understand that is not his fault. That is my fault. Those problems will be going away very, very soon. We don't get any complaints about this, Jason, but it's something that bothers me, and I'm very excited to let everybody know that those problems will be going away very, very soon. So, okay. So we're going to start putting together this fantasy aquarium. The rules are there's no budget, but this does still need to be something that you could keep in a realistic home. We're not going to go rent a 5,000 square foot warehouse and make it look like the Ohio Fish Rescue. We're talking one tank, anything you want, but it has to go in your house. And I don't know how you feel about it, Jason, but I think you'll probably agree. I think the very first decision that needs to be made is what will be inhabiting that tank. I tell people all the time, you make your decision about fish first, and then you set your tank up to accommodate those fish. Because if your fantasy tank is a 55-gallon aquarium, and then you go out to decide what kind of fish you want, you're going to probably see a lot of fish that you'd like to have, but can't go in a 55-gallon tank. So let's make the decision of what we're going to put in the tank first. And I would love to hear what you would put in this fantasy tank first, but I'm going to say this. You're not allowed to put what I'm going to put in the tank. You can't do it. It has to be something different from mine, but you don't know what mine is. If you announce your fish and you see a really angry look on my face, it's because you took my fish. I think I know what yours are going to be, but it just better not be what I'm going to put in mine.
I doubt I will be taking your fish because I have a very specific vision in mind. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, you see the 50-gallon lowboy. That aquarium is 4 feet long. It's 2 feet wide, and it's only 10 inches tall. So it's a very short tank. What I would do is I would basically take that tank extend it. So instead of being 4 feet long, it would be 12 feet long. Now, I know we said realistic, but this 12-foot tank isn't going to have a ton of volume. And that's why it's still on the realistic side. So basically, it's like taking 3 of these low boys, sticking them together, right, end on end. I would actually shorten the width. So I'd only go 18 and a half inches, not 24. But then I would triple the height. No, not even triple. I'd probably go 24 inches tall. So I've got a tank that is going to be 12 feet, 18 and a half inches wide, and 24 inches tall. Gallons, you're thinking, oh my gosh, how big is this tank? In my mind, I'm thinking, so if I were to just triple it and double the length, it would be a 300-gallon tank. But because I am shortening the width, going 24 inches, it's probably going to be, without doing any of the math, less than 300 gallons. Right, so somewhere around a 260, 280. Now, because it's so long, you're thinking, well, how the heck are you supposed to put that in the house? Well, if it's on the first floor of a home, it will fit through a door because it's only 18 and a half inches wide. And because it's so long, if you think about how many floor joists that it's going to rest over, it's not overwhelming. It's not like I'm putting a 6-foot, 300-gallon tank. You're like, is your house going to support this? No, we're talking about 12 feet. So it's basically one wall of a living room, maybe not even the full wall, right? Because living rooms tend to be a little bit larger. So it's a display tank on a wall. Maybe you could make an argument that you might have to reinforce some of the joists if you have a basement or a crawl space. Yeah, you might want to put some 4x4s down there, but for the most part, this is a manageable size. It's nothing super, super crazy. But again, we're talking about an amazing tank. That's the size that I want. Now, you asked about the fish, right? Kind of did this out of order.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
I wasn't going to yell at you. You know, I was like, hey, answer the question. But now you're going to get to it. So,
all right. So now I'm going to get to the fish. I did this out of order. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Because I felt like I had to lay that out. Now, the fish are very different from what I think you would do. They're all small.
Oh, good.
They're almost all small. Probably the largest fish I would have in there would be my centerpiece fish, and that would be Geophagus topahos. And that's a fish that maxes out at around 5 inches. Okay, so it's around a 5-inch fish. In a tank that size, I'm probably looking at a dozen of them. And so that's my centerpiece. Okay, so I've picked even though I've got a larger tank, I've picked a smaller geo because the other fish in the tank aren't going to be that large. Right. Along the bottom, I want a big giant school of a couple different types of cories. I really love the orange lasers. I have them in my low boy right behind me, and the Adolphi cory. All right, those are 2 of my favorites. So probably going to do about a dozen each of those. And then I've got to have some action all throughout the aquarium. And so what I would choose is, one, I really like the pearl gourami. So now I've got this fish that's exploring. It's got this crazy iridescence similar to the Geophagus. A lot of people don't know with the pearl gourami, there's 2 different types. You've got the standard and you have the gold pearl gourami. I showed both of those when I did the species profile. When you mix those together, holy cow, are those things amazing. So I could see myself doing like a dozen pearl gouramis, because the nice thing is they get along well with one another. So you don't have to worry about them fighting like other types of gouramis do. So now I've got these geos. I've got the cory cats at the bottom. I've got the pearl gouramis mid to upper water. And now I need my schooling fish. And for that, I'm going to go something that is going to be really vibrant in color. And so I really like the red cherry tetra. They're expensive. They're relatively rare. But they have got some of the most, I know they call them red cherry tetras, but they have some of the most intense dark orange to almost red color you will ever see. Red cherry tetra. I talked about them. I did a species profile on those as well. That's got to be the stunning thing. When you look at that tank and you're watching these fish swim around, that's one where you're like, wow, that is striking. And so I'm thinking in a tank that size, 50 of them. Right, 50 or 60 of those bad boys swimming around. And then I've got to kind of change things up a little bit, because I need a fish that's going to be maybe a different color. Now for this one, I'm going to go a little bit different. And I recognize that if it was a smaller tank, the geos might decrease the community of this particular type of fish. But with a tank that size and with the outline that I'm going to have for it, which we'll talk about later, something like a a celestial pearl Daniel, something that's going to get a lot of blue, huge number. I'm talking 350 of these fish. I know it sounds like a lot, but in a tank that size, trust me, it's not. You can easily put 30 of them in a 29 gallon and be like, I think I need something else. So when you've got 300, 350, this is a fish that would be really striking. The only thing that might make me shift is if I possibly switch to cardinal tetras, right? So either the CPD or the cardinal. So maybe I do like 60 of each, right? 60, 70 of each, and just have these nice, really a bunch of schooling tetras. Plecos, I love bristlenose plecos. And so I would definitely have some of the super reds, right? So a few of the super red bristlenose. I really like the long fin lemon drop with the blue eyes. So I probably have a half a dozen of those swimming around. I've got to have some Siamese algae eaters because just like in the tanks behind me, inevitably you're going to get some algae issues like green hair algae or blackbeard. So I throw a half a dozen of those bad boys in there. And I think between the cory cats on the bottom, I've got my bristlenose plecos, I've got my Siamese algae eaters. For the most part, my cleanup crew and my scavenger fish are mostly set. So I think that's the outline of what I would do.
Whew. That is hard to top.
I'm sure you can do it.
Well, no, I don't think I will because I'm intentionally not going to, because my strategy would be very different. I'm not going to break the rules like you did. I'm not going to say
I
my
did.
tank
I'm sorry
size.
I broke the rules. I realized it halfway through. I started talking about the tank size.
It's okay. I mean, hey, listen, this is your podcast too. You do what you want, but I'm going to hold off on saying what that is. And mine has changed, by the way. You and I discussed very briefly before this started. I feel like you one-upped me way too much, so I'm going to have to modify my tank a little bit, but I'm going to follow the rules and I'm going to talk about the fish first. But here's the thing. The only fish that I'm going to pick out right now are going to be my centerpiece fish. But there's a very specific reason why that is. My centerpiece fish is going to be Altum angels. And the main reason why is because of your neck of the woods, the Shed Aquarium. I saw Altums that were full grown and like nothing I've ever seen before. I've been keeping fish a long time. I've kept thousands of angels in my 30 years. Maybe not thousands, but it's been a lot. I've never seen angels this big. I did not realize they got this big. They were absolutely massive. And I couldn't take my eyes off of them. There were 10-foot long arapaimas right across from these Altum angels because it was in the Amazonian area. There were big, giant, all kinds of fish in there, but nothing impressed me more than the angels. I've always been an advocate for angels. I love them so much, so many different kinds. But I've never seen any that get as big as the Altums. So I'd be setting this tank up for Altums. Now, the rest of the fish that are going in there, I'm going to take a different strategy than yours. I love all of the fish that you chose, down to the Siamese algae eaters and the plecos and all that. I'm more of a zebra pleco guy. I just think they're awe-inspiring. But in a tank the size that I'm going to go with, I could get multiples and it would be fine. So, big fan of the super reds too, but the zebras have always blown my mind. Lisa has one in this tank here behind me. Not the Oscar tank, but another one that's behind me. And when it comes out, I'm like, oh, look at that. It's so cool. So they definitely have to have one in there. But here's what I would do. This would be an all-day thing. And I apologize to my good friend Mark, which is the owner of Aquariums Unlimited. I would be passing his store. And there's only one reason why I would be passing his store, and that would be variety. Because my fun that I would have would be, I would source my Altum angels. I don't know where they would come from, but I would get those first. I would go to Baltimore, Maryland, and I would go to a store that's called House of Tropicals. It's about a 5.5 hour trip for me from where I live now, but it's worth it. You want to know why? They've got over 500 freshwater aquariums full of every kind of fish you've ever imagined in your life. And I've always had very good success with the fish that I've gotten from this place. And I can order wholesale but I'm not going to. I'm going to go to a place like that. And the agenda is going to be this. I've got my Altums. I know what those are. But now I'm going to go in one sitting, and I'm going to pick out all of the other inhabitants, all of the tank mates for those Altums. I'm not going to be buying Altums that are full grown. So they're going to have some growing to do. So I'm going to be going up there, and I'm just going to be looking at all of the community fish. Yes, I have my favorites. I love CPDs. I love guppies. I love rummy nose, one of my favorite all-time fish. Tetras, the rummy nose tetras. I have my favorites, but I would not be going into this with my favorites in mind. I would be going there to see what it is that they have, and I would be picking out a whole lot of fish. Maybe not as many as you, because I don't think my tank is going to be as big as yours, but it's still going to be a good enough size to really showcase those Altums and whatever else it is that they have that I would be picking out. But like you, I'd be picking out some bottom feeders, some Corys, some Plecos. I would literally lose my marriage if I didn't pick out some big old fat snails to go in there too. So there would be that. There'd be plenty of community fish and cleanup crews and all that kind of stuff. I would check all those boxes, but I would just be making my decision of what those fish are right there on the spot, and I'd be bringing them home. Now, what am I going to be putting into them? Well, or not what am I going to be putting them into? There's a couple of things that I have to address before we get to the tank size itself. And that is, first of all, with a community tank with Altum Angels, this is going to be a heavily planted tank. Obviously, I sell plants. They are, one of my sources of livelihood. So of course I'm going to do that. What kind of plants? All of them. That's what kind. All of them. Primarily stem plants that get very tall, and you will understand that when you hear the tank size that I'm going to go with. But I need to address the overall goal here with this, because now I'm sitting here with an Oscar on my shirt. I'm sitting here, if you're watching this on YouTube, with 3 Oscars behind me. I'm known as the Oscar guy. And there's probably a lot of people that are listening to this or watching this that are thinking, well, that's disappointing, because I sure did think John's fantasy tank would be an Oscar tank or an African cichlid tank, the 2 things that I'm known for. Well, there's a very particular reason why I would not choose those. My fantasy tank is a tank that I'm going to set up that I never have to touch. I'm not going to do automatic feeders, and I'm not going to do all of that. I still want to interact with the tank. But I just had a milestone happen in my life a couple of days ago, Jason, that happened with you way sooner than me. And that is, I just 2 days ago from the time we're filming this, I hit the age of 50. And so what I'm looking for is something that requires very little work from me. I have not grown lazy in my 50 years, but I got a pretty jam-packed schedule, and I don't want to mess around with my tank. I want it to be, there's no such thing as maintenance free, but I want it to be as little work as needed. An Oscar tank, there's no way around it. There's no possible scenario where you could never have to touch a Oscar tank. You're going to have to vacuum your substrate. You're going to have to get in there and clean it all out. But a community tank heavily planted with angels and a community fish, an argument could be made that you'd be perfectly fine using a planted substrate, an Eco Complete or a Brightwell or any of those, and never really have to. In fact, it would be a bad idea to vacuum out the substrate on there. So in the effort to have a tank that I very rarely have to mess with, I'm going to go with the community planted tank with angels being the centerpiece. So that's my rationale there. And to add to that, there would be one more big thing. And that is, this is a fantasy. This is a fantasy of a tank that I barely have to touch. So with that in mind, the first thing I'm going to do before I buy the tank, before I start setting anything up, I'm going to either do it myself or hire a plumber to come out and run me a plumbing supply line to this tank and a drain. Not a drain that just goes out the wall and shoots into the yard like I have on this 360 behind me. Works great, but we're talking fantasies here. So it's going to either hook up to a drain that goes to the drain field or the city, or it's going to be a drain that goes out to a storage tank, which we could then use to water the plants and stuff like that. I don't know. That's a conversation for another day. But I would have this plumbing installed to the location of the tank again, so I'm not dragging any hoses around. I'm not carrying any buckets. I'm not doing anything like that. I've got my supply right there, and I've got my drain right there. I would drill the tank, or if we're talking fantasies, I would order it this way. I know this sounds crazy. Make fun of me all you want. But I would have 2 drains in the tank. I would have one up top, actually, skip that. I'm sorry. I'm going off on a thing here that I'm not actually going to do. Forget about the drain on the top. My drain, my overflow that I'm going to put in this tank is going to be halfway down. And the reason why is because that drain that's right there already installed for this tank, I'm going to turn a valve by way of a solenoid so I don't even have to touch it. And I'm going to drain 50% of that tank without even touching it. And no fish go out of it. No plants go out of it. Nothing. It just drains halfway down. Again, I don't want to touch this thing. So solenoid valves are expensive, and it costs a lot to hook them up to controllers and all that kind of stuff. But we're talking fantasies here, so that's what I'm going to do. So my tank is going to have a drain halfway down to do a 50% water change without even touching it, and supplying the new water with the supply that's already been professionally installed back there. So there you go. There's my maintenance. I'm planning my maintenance before I even plan out the tank. But when it comes to the tank, I was originally going to go for a 240, but then you went crazy and started talking about 12-foot long tanks. And so I'm going to have to expand mine a little bit. I was just going to go with the 60 or the 72 by 18 by 30, which is the size of all 3 of my 240s. But I'm going to add another 2 feet to that. I'm going to go 8 feet long, 2 feet deep, and 30 inches tall. A 30-inch tall tank to me is the perfect tank. 24 is great, but 30 is a game changer. So I don't know how many gallons that would be. Probably, I don't know, what that would add, like another 80 gallons. So probably 320 gallon. That's my tank. It's got the drain in the middle. That's it. With Altum Angels as the centerpiece.
That's a pretty darn sweet tank. And I agree with you 100% in terms of being maintenance free. When I envision this tank, it's more of a kind of a South American feel. One other fish I'd put in there, I thought about this. I'm like, oh my gosh, this would be a huge miss if I didn't do this. The rummy nose rasbora, not the rummy nose tetra, but I would put at least 50 male rummy nose rasboras in this tank. That would give me the blue and the orange that I really want. So yeah, heavily planted with this tank because none of the fish in there are going to eat plants. A lot of driftwood. I imagine the driftwood's coming from the sides, and you've got this kind of open area in the middle. Lots of structure. If I'm going to put a dozen geos in this tank, I want lots of structure, lots of hiding places, lots of caves, lots of plants. I absolutely love. We have a crinum. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the back. It's a crinum that can actually grow about 3 or 4 feet tall. It's got a bulb. I don't remember the type of crinum it is. I picked it up in one of the swaps.
Does it look like an octopus?
No. That's Crinum calamastratum. That is my favorite all-time plant, and it would absolutely be in that tank. This is a different type of crinum. It's got almost like, imagine jungle val, but with leaves that are twice as thick. And again, easily 4 feet long. We have it in Joanna, when we set up the 125, at some point in the video, we have a picture or a video of her where she held the bulb up from the crinum, and it was going all the way down to her feet and was still on the floor by another foot. And she's 5'10". So actually, I think that plant gets to be about 6 feet tall. So you have to trim it. But imagine those plants coming out of the corners, just like you, absolutely everything is going to be automated. The stocking that I have isn't actually, and same with yours, probably isn't going to actually require that much in terms of water changes. If you could really balance that aquarium with how many plants you're putting in, especially if you have some faster growing plants, water wisteria, water sprite that are column feeders anyway, you're going to get a lot of nitrate reduction. Now, here's the great thing. We're going to get to this in a second, but there are ways that you can build this tank where between the plants and everything else, water changes will be minimal. We have people in our fish clubs. One guy is doing very similar to, in fact, there's a number of people in our clubs that did very similar to what you're talking about, where they have these large tanks. They just, hey, Alexa, do a water change. And what Alexa does is then it's hooked up to the drain and it starts draining the tank to a certain, until it gets to a point where the valve is no longer, or the drain hole
Overflow.
is basically no longer draining. And so then, hey, Alexa, fill tank, and it just fills the tank. And so it does that. And for them, they've actually set up where because they breed a lot of cichlids, they set it up where the drain is at the bottom, and then it will drain, do a 90% water change, and then it will just fill it back up. And they can do this. Some of the people in our clubs, they travel all over the world. And so they have a camera. And that's the other thing I would do too, is I'd have a camera looking at that tank. And so they can just do it automated. They've got an app, just hit water change. They can watch it on a camera, go all the way down. They can watch it fill all the way back up. They can put it on a timer, so they don't even have to do anything. It just automatically does it. Kind of like when you have the auto water change systems that just have a constant drip. In fact, that's most likely what I would do, is I would have a constant drip system where I would know, okay, here's how high the nitrates get. If for some reason they would ever even climb above that 20 parts per million, I would just set it so that it would add a certain amount of water every single day, and it would just drain right out the overflow. And so there would never be an opportunity for those really large water changes, which do stress fish, right? I mean, when they're in there and they're like, oh my gosh, what happened to half my volume? So if you've got a constant water change system, I never have to worry about it. And maybe that is 1% a day, 2% a day. Maybe it's just enough to return the water hardness back so that the plants are still getting the minerals that they need. And it's not even so much about the fish anymore, if you can really balance the aquarium. So that would be cool. In terms of the substrate, I would really like to have something on the darker side, but still be natural. I know you mentioned a planted substrate. That's a strong possibility as a base layer. And then on top of that, we used red flint sand, which I really like because it's a really dark tan. So you're still going to maximize your fish color, but it's not going to be so dark where it looks unnatural and show some fish waste and stuff like that. Background for me, it's always black, right? Because that is what, black. For me, especially with the geos, especially for your Altums, that's going to show insane color. Those fish are really going to stand out. For you, did you say you're doing 2 feet or 18.5 inches?
Wide? 2 feet.
Okay. So for you, you would actually have the opportunity to do more of a 3D background if you wanted to. But for me, with 18.5 inches with a tank it's that long, it might narrow the tank a little bit too much. So I probably wouldn't do it. I just go straight black. But that's,
mine would be black too.
Yeah. In terms of just the way the tank looks, that's kind of the look I'm going for. It's that really dark tan, like you've seen the 125s, black background. It's going to be awesome. I know you're probably going to want to talk about all the other equipment, so I'll let you chime in what else you're going to be doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the natural progression in this conversation is to go filter next. Now I'm going to have to make an adjustment to mine. Because I had to make an adjustment to my tank because I just couldn't find it possible for you to one-up me. So I've increased the size of my tank. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go with the same filtration that I was going to go with before, except I'm going to double it now. This might be controversial to some people. And if it is, great. Put down in the comments, if you're watching this on YouTube, what you would do in this case. I'm going to FX6s. And what I'm going to do is I was originally, maybe it's the salesman in me, with the straight up 240, I was going to do an FX6 and a Tidal 110, just to keep the Tidal 110, basically using it as a skimmer, to have the input all the way up, and then use it basically as a skimmer on one end, and the FX6 output would be on the other end. But since now I'm going to have two FX6s, what I would probably do, and the Aquascape would probably require me to do this anyway, I'd probably have one very low input and one higher input, just to keep the top and bottom of the tank turning over instead of it just being all up at the top. I maybe would even consider dropping the output of the FX6 on one side, maybe halfway down the tank, to really get some flow for the plants to really move. But I don't know. We might be getting a little wacky there. But I would go two FX6s, and again, back to what we talked about before when we did our episode all about canister filters. The main reason, first of all, the FX6 is a beast. It is the epitome of aquarium filters. Best on the market as far as I'm concerned. But it's the quietness, because this is my fantasy. I've got this in my living room. I'm watching House of the Dragon on Sunday nights, and this tank is right next to me. So I want it to be quiet. I don't want there to be a single sound coming out of this thing. I'm not even going to put an air pump on it, because even the quietest air pumps make a little bit of noise. I'm just using the canisters because I want silence. And so two FX6s, that's what I'm going with. Have that adjustability of being able to have one up, one down, all that kind of stuff. And I think if it's a 350 gallon, I think two FX6s can handle that. It's probably even too much for a tank that size. Because like you said, there's going to be a lot of natural filtration in there. Probably don't even need to, but we're fantasizing here. There's no budget. I'm getting two of the most expensive filter on the market.
All right. So filtration for me, I despise maintaining filters. I don't care what they are. So I'm going to go sump. All right. And so again, it's a large tank. The FX6 is a great filter. It's an awesome choice, but I don't want to ever have to crack any canister filter open. So I'm going to go sump. I'm going to use a fairly large pump to move that water. Not so large where, again, I'm dealing with nanofish here. So I got to be careful with the flow. The sump is going to give me a whole bunch of benefits. One is that filter sock. And so if I'm doing something where I'm limiting water changes anyway, right? So I'm getting to a point where water changes might not be all that necessary. Well, the next thing on there, the next most time-consuming thing is probably going to be filter maintenance. So that sump is going to allow me to put the filter sock on there, which I can change out every couple days, chuck it in the washing machine, get the new one, throw it on there. And then the water is running through the rest of the sump filtration system as it is. So I've got that fine filter floss. If that gets gunked up, I can just take that off, rinse it out real fast, or toss it, put a new layer on. The other thing that the sump does is now I've got all that biomedia in there. I'm going to run probably around a 100-gallon sump. I'm also going to do two things with that sump. One, I'm going to put visible light down there. So if I ever want to do any plant grow out, or for some reason the plants that I have in my tank are not sufficiently taking care of nitrate, I can grow pothos down there, no problem. And that can also lower the nitrate levels. I doubt I'm going to need it, but if I wanted to do that, it's still there. The second thing, and I had a guy in our fish club do this, and it was awesome. He actually built his own sump system, and he ran it all through a pretty sizable UV generator. So that is absolutely going to be incorporated into my tank. That's going to take care of any potential pathogen that's actually in the water column. So should there ever be a problem, that UV generator is going to be awesome. So I'm going to be running everything. It's going to go through the sump. Well, it's going to come through that UV generator, through the sump. It's going to do everything. It's going to come back. I'll have the visible light down there for the live plants as well. The other thing that I would do, because you were getting at it as well, is because you're going to run maybe a top and a middle tier return, I would do the same, except I would have one return that's coming from the sump and probably a wave maker that would be completely hidden along the backside of that aquarium on a timer. And that thing would come on maybe a couple times a day, stay on for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And the purpose of that wave maker is any type of detritus or stuff that has fallen to the substrate, fish waste that is not going to sink into the substrate, which there probably won't be a lot, but there will be some. Turn that on 5-10 minutes. It would blow that stuff across into the return of my sump, hopefully suck that up, and that would catch a lot of that. It would be there. If I don't need it, then it doesn't turn on, right? I would just, it would be back there. I would turn it off and just never turn it on again. The UV would have to also be on some type of a switch, because if there's ever a situation where I need to run meds, UV destroys meds. A lot of people
Right.
don't realize that when they're like, "Oh yeah, I put in the meds. I'm also putting my UV sterilizer." And I'm like, you literally just destroyed all your medication as they go through that UV. You destroyed the active ingredients of that med. So it would also be on a switch so that I could deal with that.
Yeah, and in your situation with a 12-foot tank, you almost have to go with a sump because you're going to have,
Yeah.
you're either going to have multiple returns or you're going to have the wave makers like you said, and that's why I went to two FX6s is because I originally I was dealing with a 6-foot tank, and I think one FX6 would be perfectly fine for that. But when you're talking about 8 feet, that's if you haven't seen an 8-foot tank, I'm sitting in front of one. It's pretty substantial, and to think that one filter, even though it's the most powerful filter on the market, can make the current go through that entire 8 feet, it's just not realistic. So adding a second one in there, and then even still with a 12-foot tank, you'd probably still need even more than that. So the glorious thing with a sump is that if you wanted to, you could just do 3 returns and just branch off your pump and have returns all over the place if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So that would work out really good. So we got fish, we got our tank size. I've got my plumbing installed. I got that up on you. So far, I think mine is a much better setup because of the plumbing.
Well, I think it was a given that I'd have my plumbing installed. I mean, it's a 12-foot tank. I'm not sitting there doing a gravel vac.
Well, I mean, you didn't mention it,
sorry.
and I did, so I'm winning.
That is a true point. But if I didn't clearly mention it, and I didn't, yes, there would be plumbing installed. There would be, well, I did mention it because I said I'd have auto water change, right? So I'd have a slow drip system coming through there. And the only way to do that is if you've got plumbing. You can't do that.
You
from
didn't
your
mention
sink.
that until after I talked about mine. So like I tried to one up, I wasn't going to allow you to one up me with the tank size. You weren't going to let me one up you on the water system. So
Yeah, I went auto water change, slow drip system, bro.
I actually,
about that.
I really like that. And I meant to mention that when you said it, but I didn't want to interrupt you. I really like the idea of just doing a trickle system. Even if it's one where you just put a drip emitter in there and just leave it on all the time, where it's just putting in a small amount, but it's constant. I think that's great. And, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, but I think you could, if you're adding tiny amounts of water like that constantly, you could get away with probably not putting water conditioner in the tank either.
Oh, for sure.
So, yeah, when I'm doing it with 50%, there's no way of getting around having to put, come on, I'm not afraid to put water conditioner in the tank. There's no such thing as a maintenance-free aquarium. I understand, even though I'm going to try to set this up to be as maintenance-free as possible, there's still going to have to be some. I am willing to crack open those canister filters once a month and do what I got to do, especially if I don't have to do water changes. I personally would rather maintain a canister than a sump. We differ there, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. I own 5 sumps, so I can't make too much of an argument against them. But, right. I'm okay with cracking open the canister, especially when we're considering fantasy situations here. I'm probably retired, so I got plenty of time. So
before you continue, I do have a question.
Okay.
If you were to top off any of those tanks, would you put any water conditioner in there? Just like, it's a vat, like it's maybe, let's just say the tank behind you, you're getting ready to do this podcast. It's a little bit low. You can see the water line. You're just going to go fill it up an inch in that tank. Are you water conditioning that?
Most likely no.
I don't either. So like all these tanks in the gallery, I usually, because there's evaporation, they're all open top back here, except for the 2 that are kind of off screen. I just throw the thing in there, and if I'm filling up an inch, I have never, ever in my life put water conditioner in there, and I've never had a single issue because it's such a little volume compared to the rest of the tank.
Well, in my situation here, I'm so glad that you brought this up because it shows you're a true friend. You notice everything. The water line that you see here above me, if you're watching this on YouTube, that is not from the water being low. That's from my water not being level, or my tank not being level.
Oh, I don't notice anything. I mean, because every time we do a thing, you're like me, where the water is always up to the black rim. That's right. I'm OCD like that. If it's a little bit below there, like I have to do a water change. My tanks are not fully level either. Like the tank that's got the geos in it, and someone mentioned like, oh, when I did the video, I don't think it's level. I'm like, well, it was as level as I could make it at the time. And things settle, right? You've got a huge
Right.
tank behind you. Even the 125s, you can do all the shimming and all the stuff that you want to do. And then the minute you start putting 1,000 gallons of water in there, it's going to change a little bit. You're not draining that. Well, maybe some people would. I'm not taking all that water out the substrate. They're trying to, oh yeah, I got to do another 1/8 of an inch. Man, forget that. When you fill that thing all the way up, as long as you keep it that way, it is going to be level enough.
Well, and the thing is, it's something that I've wanted to address for a while now. Sometimes, I don't know why this is, but sometimes it goes away. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's not like the tank is teeter-tottering. It's just, I think
Yeah,
that the
no,
way the water is being filled back up with the sump, sometimes it just balances itself out. I don't know. It's weird, but
that could be.
I've got some pretty heavy duty pry bars and stuff like that. I've tried to level this thing myself. It's just not. It has to be completely drained, substrate removed, and I need like 5 people here to be able to
And then
level
the
this
worst
tank
part
out.
about it is you're going to do all that, think you've re-leveled it again because now you've got no weight in there. And you might go the other direction with it. Like, oh, for crying
Yep.
out loud, I thought I only needed 1/8 of an inch. And it turns out I went quarter and now it's screwed up just the exact opposite way.
Yep.
So,
And this tank was perfectly level when we installed it the first time back in 2022. And it, like you said, this is something that gradually through time that happened. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why it is that way. But anyway, yeah. For me, when I top off, it's because my sump is getting lower and the returns are starting to blow bubbles and stuff like that. It's like, okay, I know I need to put some water in there. It's not from a visual depletion of the water that I need to refill. But to answer your question, no, I don't. If I'm just topping off, I don't use water conditioners. I mean, it's probably not the best advice to put out there, but at the same time, we're only talking about a little bit of water. We're not talking about, putting 100 gallons of water into here. That's
we're doing a legit
different.
water. I'm talking about topping off. I'm not talking about when we remove
Right.
water and put more 25% water, change 20. No, I'm using conditioner there, even probably a 10%. But we're talking about a little tiny bit. You're just throwing the hose in there for a couple seconds and filling it, topping it off, and moving about your day.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
so
that
next
goes
thing,
back. Well, I was just going to say, but that goes back to if you're doing a trickle system like that, you're kind of doing that all the time, and I probably still wouldn't put water conditioners in that situation. So to move on now, lights. I think lights are next. Again, my answer to this has changed, but it's only changed because my tank has gotten bigger during this conversation, so I had to add a third. I am going to stand by what I've said for ever since I saw my first Kessel light. I have said they're the best in the business. I don't care who you are. That's what I'm going with. I'm going with 3 of the 360X Tuna Sun planted aquarium Kessel lights. They're ridiculously expensive. Kessel would be the first one to tell you that, but there is not a better light on the market as far as I'm concerned. And and we're talking fantasy here, so money's no object. That's what I'm going with, 3 Kessels. And I'm very fortunate. That's what we've got on Lisa's tank. And I'm just going to tell you, it's amazing. So that's what I'm going with there.
And Kessels are awesome. I've got 2 of them on a 75 in the other room. That's the 360s as well. They're fantastic, super high end, very expensive. But again, if you like that shimmering effect, they are outstanding. Now I'm going to say, knowing that is actually not my choice. I would go with the 2 lights that are behind me. If you're watching the YouTube video podcast, these are the Aqua Illumination AI Primes, and they have all the shimmering effect that the Kessels do. Super high end light, except the price point isn't nearly as much, but they have in fact, they have more features. And what I like about those lights is they actually have what I would call extreme adjustability. So where the Kessels, you can adjust the intensity and you can adjust the color spectrum with that knob, unless you buy that controller, and then you've got another ability to adjust. But these ones via the app, they actually have, I believe it's 7 different light spectrums that you control, or light bands, right? So light wavelengths is what I was looking for. So they have 7 different ones. You can adjust it. They're fully programmable, so you don't need an outside timer. So now you've got all this stuff on your app. But here's the cool thing. Now for my tank, it's 12 feet long. These 2 absolutely way more than I need for this 4-foot tank, but I'm still going to put 6 in there. And here's why I'm going to do that. Fish sometimes like to be in an environment where there's not a ton of light. And oh, by the way, some of your plants, like for instance, in my tank, I'm sure I'm going to include anubias and some of these lower light plants. I don't want to be blasting those plants with light. And I would also like an area where there's a little bit of mystery, right? And the way that you get that, the way that you can make a tank really almost a 4-dimensional kind of aquascape is, yeah, you've got all the 3 dimensions with your rocks, your wood, your plants, and the background and your substrate. Now what if you have your lights that are actually different intensities? So you have an area in the aquarium where you've got almost like this is your showcase part of your tank, but then you've got another area that almost highlights that showcase because the lights aren't as intense in that one area. And if I've got 6 of these, I can program them so that I almost have a gradient of light where it's brighter in one area and maybe in another, but then it kind of dims in other areas and it looks very natural. But not only that, I can dim the intensity, but I can also change the color spectrum to really have an insane amount of what I would consider to be a 4th dimension. So that's going with these because of the extreme adjustability, the timing, and because I've got 6, now I can adjust the timing where the lights are coming on real slow, and maybe they're coming on real slow in different areas in the aquarium. It's going to be insane.
I like it. I mean, the aqua illumination lights, from what I've seen, are amazing. And so I can't argue with you there that that's a good choice. I really like the idea of putting a whole bunch of them on there and creating that dramatic effect. I think you got me on the lights, but you know what?
Well,
both tanks are going to have amazing lights.
The Kessels are insane too. I did a video on those just like you did. Those Kessels are ridiculous. I mean, there's a reason why the high-end professional public aquariums, you'll see those bad boys dangling from some rafters and illuminating their tanks because they want you to look at an aquarium, especially a large one, and be like, huh, that's like I am literally in a river in South America, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an excellent choice as well.
Yeah, they're both good choices. I think we've got lights covered. No, go ahead.
There is one thing we forgot, or at least I forgot. Okay. We're still inside the tank, right? We've done lights, we've done filters. It kind of goes along that line with water, CO2. Now I'm running CO2 in this fantasy aquarium, but again, just like with the water changes, that's going to be all automated. So I will make sure, and again, this is where the sump comes in handy because I can adjust the flow on that pump. So when the CO2 is really blasted, I'm not just blasting those bubbles all over the place. So I am going to be running a CO2 system in there to optimize my plants and to reduce the likelihood that I'm going to get a ton of algae that's competing with those plants.
It's a very good point. And I am a fan of CO2. I have CO2 in one of my tanks, testing out the new Fluval Bio CO2, which is a genius little system that they have. And I think it's great. I got to be honest, I hadn't even thought of that for this tank because I'm somebody that likes using plants that don't really require it. Any plant is going to benefit from CO2, but I like to use the easier plants that, they're going to benefit, but they're also going to be really, really good without it. I can't make an argument either way. I think it's smart. When you're talking about big tanks like this, you're talking about big CO2 systems, significantly more than what the little Fluval system could handle. But I'm not going to argue with you. I think it's a good idea. I really like it for the boost that it'll give the plants to combat that algae. So I think it's a good call. I think you have hit the nail on the head there, but you are going to need to go with either multiple of the largest Fluval system or just go to a welding shop, get your can of CO2 and go with the regulator and the drip emitters and all that kind of stuff. Drip emitters, I just said drip counters, diffusers, but that's fun because even though it is probably expensive to set up a system like that, it's a fun system to set up. And it's going to cost you a little bit of money, but hey, we're not in a cheap hobby. So there you go. But now we got to talk about something that complicates things for me because you've got an easy solution for it and you could literally do whatever you want to do. But I got to heat my tank and I don't have a sump to hide those heaters in. This is, you've got me on this one. There's no getting around it. But I've got an easy solution for mine. We'll get to that on the next one, on the next segment. I was originally going to go with 2 400-watt Scuba contactless heaters. I'm just going to up that to 3. Yeah. Maybe 3 300 watts instead of 2 400. That's what I'm going to. I really like the Scuba contactless. I think it's really cool, and I'm going to go with that. I love the reliability of CJ. I love the 5-year warranty. Yes, I'm doing a sales pitch because I sell these heaters, but I sell them because I think they're great, and that's what I would go with. 300 watts. I don't know if the math works out correctly because I'm doing this on the fly, but that's what I would go with for my heaters. Again, I will talk about my resolution to hiding them in the next segment that we talk about.
So, yeah, I mean, what's the general rule of thumb? 2 to 3 watts per gallon, something like that.
I've always gone with 5. I like a little overkill
maybe,
on it.
I don't remember anymore. It's because now I've gotten, there's actually some heaters on this side, but we're still heating the fish room. I've got a little heater over here. We've got the dehumidifiers running. There's no air conditioning right now running down here. So the room right now is like 82 degrees. So if I ever start just dripping sweat because I'm sitting in this room at 82 degrees, so the tanks are warm, but I do have heaters embedded within those Owaza Thermomasters and then in the tanks that have them. But if I've got a sump and I'm not heating the room, I'm not heating my living room, let's say in the fantasy situation, I am going to throw those heaters down there, but all of those heaters are going to go to an external source, all going to be plugged into one source, but I'm going to have an external in the tank. I will have a thermometer there that turns those on. I am not at all relying on any thermometers built into the heaters themselves. I don't care what brand they are. I would, if I really want to heat the tanks, and be very careful, especially when you've got multiple heaters, because you could have heaters that have the same manufacturer. This has happened a million times. Turn them all to the exact same temperature. You're like, oh, 78 degrees. You could turn 3 heaters to 78 degrees. And I promise you, one of those is going to be running pretty much all the time. And the other 2 very well may be off. They're not, because they could be off by a degree. And then all of a sudden your one heater is the one that's doing all the work. So if I'm running multiple heaters, they all get plugged into an external source. That external source is connected to my thermometer that's actually in the tank next to the intake. And then that's going to turn all 3 on at the same time or turn them all off based on what the thermometer is reading.
Yeah, I mean, with a sump, you're going to have all 3 of those heaters basically bunched together. And so you would run into that complication. For me, having an 8-foot tank, I'm going to probably have one on one end, one on the other end, and one in the middle somewhere. Or possibly even laying down, not on the substrate, but down towards the bottom of the tank in the center. So I mean, there's no way to get around. Those 3 areas of the tank are going to be different temperatures. So those heaters are going to get a workout, which is why having that reliability of the 5-year warranty on the CJ is a good thing to have. But yeah, in your situation, you're not going to be able to spread those heaters out like that in the sump. So you're going to have one that's going to be putting in the brunt of the work. It makes sense to do something like that. I just thought about it, having the heater, the contactless down at the bottom, kind of nullifies the whole concept of being able to make adjustments to that heater, but they're reliable. They stay consistent. I'm just going to set it and forget it. And that's going to be fine. But now we're getting to the real, we're almost done with this thing. I mean, we got to get the finishing touches done to it. And I think you would probably take the same strategy as me, because you're a smart guy. And you know that your skills of aquascaping are nothing compared to your beautiful wife's. And I have that same scenario in mind. I can't touch her when it comes to aquascaping. I can make a nice pile of rocks, and I can do real good with that. But when it comes to the placement of plants and the hardscape and the whole scheme of an aquascape, I can't even come at all close to my wife. So I would have my beautiful wife get up on a ladder and get herself probably inside the tank like she did with her goldfish tank, and I would have her scape the tank for me. But I would take my friend and your friend Jeff Miyake's advice, I would set up all of my equipment first, meaning my heaters, my intakes, my outputs, and I would say, okay, babe, here you go. Knock yourself out. Whatever it is that you want to do, just understand that I do want a lot of driftwood. I want a lot of rocks, obviously. I want a lot of plants, and I want a lot of my plants to be long flowing stem plants, the wisterias, the water sprites, the bacopas and the rotalas and ludwigias, and I want a lot of tall tanks flowing in the water. But other than that, that's the only guidelines I've got. Get in there and scape this tank for me. That's what I would do. And that is how I would combat the heaters. CJ heaters are gorgeous. The contactless heaters are gorgeous, but they're still heaters and they're ugly. So when it comes to heaters, they're nice looking, but all heaters are ugly. I don't want to see them. So you need to aquascape around it, keeping in mind water needs to flow back there to distribute that heat. But that's how I'm going to combat the heaters being in my tank, is I'm going to have my beautiful wife scape around them and hide them from most people that would look in there. So that's what I'm doing as far as my aquascape goes, leaving it to the wife.
Yeah. And for me, I would probably do my own hardscaping. That's what I did in the gallery. I did all the hardscaping myself with the rocks and the wood. And then I called in the big guns, Joanna, and said, okay, exception of maybe the last tank, the one behind me, I did a lot of that planting, but she's much better at understanding like the big picture with where the plants go and how to make that. Like I can do okay with the rocks and the wood, but when it comes time for like actually having the patience to glue everything together, I'm like, you got to do that, because I know myself, I lose patience, and that's when things go wrong. And then the planting, yeah, big plants, flowing plants. Like I said, that crinum, a lot of anubias. I love crypts. I want the CO2 because I want a lot of red. I want a lot of purple in that tank. And the only way you're getting that long term is CO2 and having the right nutrients in there.
Yeah, and listen, I am a fan of just a tank full of plants. I've actually got one right here that we have. Lisa has a lot of hygrophila in there. She's got some 53Bs in there. She's got some crypts, and it's kind of an assortment of plants. This tank, which you cannot see on video right now, but it's basically like if there's a plant in my inventory that's just not up to our standards, she's like, I'll take it. And she takes it and put it in here. And so the tank there's not a lot of aquascape to it. It's just basically full of plants. And I like that. I like that look of a tank that's just a big bush of plants. That's basically what it would be if I escaped it. So, that's beautiful. And I like that. Basically, let the plants be the aquascape, but there's nothing that can touch a really finely manicured scape with the rocks and the driftwood. And I can't do that nearly as good as her. So, either way you go, this is going to be with the fish and with the size and with all of that, it's going to be a gorgeous tank any way you go. It's just true that our wives would do a lot better job and make it even more beautiful than we possibly could.
And they have more patience than we do with stuff like that. Lisa has more patience than you. Joanna has more patience than I do. They're willing to step back, look at it, think about it for a while, and come back. I'm not like that. Once I start something, my goal is to get it done.
Yes.
And so at the expense sometimes of once I set something up, it's like, now that it's done, it's that way, and I don't want to change it. Where Joanna's not afraid to mess around and come up with 60 different options. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a thing and like, no, that's cool, leave it. And she's like, no, I'm going to mess with it. And I get like anxiety from it. So I have to walk away because I'm like, I like what you just did. You're going to mess it up. I can't tell you how many, like, no, don't do it. You're going to mess it up. And then I come down an hour later. She's like, did I mess it up? And I'm like, no, looks better. Okay. But so, I walk away and let her have the patience. Now, the one thing I would do with this fantasy aquarium is either build it into the wall, right?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Or B, I would have it appear as though it was part of nature, right? So a lot of like your public aquariums where there would be plants around it on the outside, land plants, right? Land plants around it. So that it's almost like it's coming out of the wall if it's going to be something where I'm not building a wall around it. And sometimes that's actually the better thing to do, because then you have the open top. And the more I look at aquariums that are nicely aquascaped, I prefer that. I prefer not to have the wall around it where you just see the aquarium, because you can build a lot more interest when you have large pieces of driftwood sticking out the top. So if I move over, you can see let me move this way so you can hear me talking too. But in the low boy behind me, we've got these rocks that I took and I built them outside. It almost looks like I don't know, Mordor or something like that. And the tanks behind me, the 125s, they've got some of the driftwood is coming out of the top. Now the downside is I can't cover those tanks, right? So I got to be mindful of the fish that I keep, and there is evaporation. There are serious downsides to that, but I like that. So I would probably have Joanna build something around the aquarium, not a wall necessarily, but plants and things like that to make it look like it's just part of nature.
I really like that, but I also really like lids on my tanks for the humidity and for all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So and I'm glad you brought that up because we didn't address stands at all. There's so many different things that you can do as far as what you're putting your tank on. I think, again, when we're talking fantasy here, I'm a woodworker, I'm a cabinet maker. Mm-hmm. And so part of the fantasy for me would be to build, it would be built into the wall, but it's not built into the wall. Basically, the wall is built around the tank. So if you remember back in the day, we always had entertainment centers and now, the tanks, the TVs just hang on the wall. I would be building something more like an entertainment center where my tank would be there and I'd be building cabinets and shelves and things like that around it to make it to where the tank looks like it's level with the wall, but it's not the wall. It's actually
nice
cabinets that are around it. Back in like 1994, a buddy of mine saw my aquariums, which I had built into the wall. And he really liked that. So he bought a 125 gallon. His name was Damon Bragg, one of my favorite people on the planet. He trained me on how to do my job with cable. He had me come out to his house. This was back in the day where you could just call your friend and ask for a favor and they'd be like, sure. Good luck doing that now. But I went to his house with all of my tools and all my fancy stuff. And he had a non-load bearing wall that went right down the middle of his basement. And so we cut that and put a 125 in the wall. So from the other side, from the living room side, all you saw was the glass pane with a little door jamb trim around it. And that's a really, really good look. A little too modern for me. I like that look, but I like there to be a lot of stuff around the tank, like you said. So my vision would have the tank there with all the cabinets around it, which Lisa would fill with all of her house plants and all of her stuff. And so it's kind of the same goal that you have, but I got to have a lid on my tank. I got to have that. So I wouldn't have the plants coming out of it, even though Lisa would want it to. But here's the thing. The goldfish tank that Lisa just set up, she was able to kind of do both. If you look at it, it looks like the plants are coming out of the tank, but they're not. There's lids on there. But the way she scaped everything around the tank and on the inside, it makes it look like all the plants are coming out and it all is one big thing. And so I would have her work her magic there. What Lisa doesn't know is this fantasy tank would require a lot of work on her part.
And she would do all the maintenance naturally, like algae scraping, trimming the plants. Yeah, I mean, that just to be clear, whoever puts the plants in the tank has to maintain those plants for the life of the aquarium.
That's right.
They don't know that. That's a contract that they sign, the fine print. When you say, okay, sweetheart, here's the contract of your responsibilities, and then fine print. Whoever puts plants in aquarium is responsible for maintenance of the aquarium. Hey,
that's it.
Sign away.
I mean, you know that going in. It's like a handshake deal. It doesn't have to be written down. It's just, that when you put the plant in, guess what? It's your responsibility now. I probably would not be able to convince Lisa to do that part. Although she takes care of a lot of our stuff, almost all of our stuff in here anyway, without me even asking her. So I'm lucky that way. But no, I mean, there'd be very little work that needs to be done on this fantasy tank. So, but with the plants that I want, there would be a lot of trimming going in there once a month and trimming these plants down. So, and then take them to swaps and sell the clippings to people for dirt cheap at
Although
swaps.
Just chopping off the top of like Jungle Val, that actually doesn't sell because, it's just dead leaves, but there's that.
I wouldn't have jungle val. I wouldn't have jungle val. It's a great plant, but it does not agree with me. So I have not had success with jungle val. So yeah, I wouldn't want that, but I would have a lot of plants that you can just lop the top off and sell them to somebody, and they can plant them and have their own tank that or plant that grows out of control. But yeah, I don't know that there's really anything more that needs to be talked about. We could probably have this conversation for about 3 hours if we really wanted to. But I think we covered most of the bases, and it was a lot of fun to do. If here's the funny thing about it. We could do this monthly, and our tanks would be different every single time.
Oh, yeah. Wait, I have a question. There's one thing we didn't address, and it just popped into my brain.
Okay.
Are you ready? Sorry to throw this at you last minute. Glass or acrylic?
Oh, I'm going glass.
I am
That's a
too.
really good question, but I'm going glass.
But it is a legitimate question, right? Because with the size of the aquariums that we're dealing with here, the weight, right? I mean, I could see someone be like, oh man, I'm doing acrylic all day, but I don't want to deal with the scratching stuff and all that kind of thing. So I would also do glass, but I was just curious if you would lean the same way. Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up. I am not anti-acrylic. I think they have their place. I think they're amazing. When you're going to build something that's the size of what the fish gallery has, you have no choice. You have to go with acrylic. But for what we're talking about for the living room, it's just automatically going to go glass for me. But a lot of times you get into these sizes where it's just not possible. I know custom aquariums, which is where I've gotten four of my 5 big tanks, one of them being Lisa's. Their maximum is 36 inches as far as height goes. They can go up to 12 feet long, but they can only go 36 inch wide panels. So, if I wanted to go with something 4 feet, which if we're having that, you won the lottery, and so you've got that Elon Musk kind of money. I was just going to use a bad expression for that, but where there's just, you don't even have to think about a price tag on anything. Okay, we're talking about something that I'm going to build a house around, and that kind of size would require acrylic. But no, for the normal tank that really anybody could get, it's going to be glass.
And keep in mind too, once you go over around, I've had the 4 foot 150, which was a 30-inch tall tank. You go much above that, it is really, really hard. You're talking about, plants and maintenance and aquascaping and even stuff like doing algae. It's not easy. Your arms are only so long, even if you're up on a ladder. So you go over 30 inches, you've got even a 3 foot tank, a 36-inch tank is not easy to maintain.
Oh, you're 100% right. I mean, I've got 3 30-inch tall tanks. Yeah. Lisa's is 30 inches, but it's 4 foot by 4 foot. So she quite literally got into the tank to set the rocks and stuff like that. And that's, I do not enjoy aquascaping any of my big tanks for that reason. This tank here is 3 feet front to back. So even this one is really, really hard to get to things that are all the way in the back. So yeah, that is something you want to set up an aquascape. It'll probably be miserable, but you want to set something up that you don't have to mess with, because it is a bear to get down into these tanks, and you can't do it without expecting to just get everything wet.
Yep. Which is why I think your setup, right, that we talked about at the end in mine, there probably should be enough space behind that tank for us to be able to get behind on a large 12 foot tank. So that false wall that you're talking about, or any way that you can build that up where you can walk behind it and get to things like intake. Oh my, I was doing maintenance and an intake fell out, or a cord fell down. You're like, I have no idea how I'm going to get that, right? Or a fish jumped out of your tank and went down behind, and it's a big fish, and it went behind the tank and the wall, and you're like, oh, this is closed off back here. I'm totally screwed. I can't do anything about this. Or even some water that you need to clean up from back there. You're going to want to be able to get behind that tank, that size.
Like I said, we could talk about this for 3 hours. And that's one of those things. I'm so glad you brought that up, because you are so 100% right. And I would take it a step farther. There would be an entire room behind my tank. I'm not talking about a 20 foot by 20 foot room, but I'm talking, I'd probably have 6 feet behind my tanks from, I'd have 6 feet of clearance behind my tank to actually go in there. And if you think about it, it's a big tank. It's in your living room. You need somewhere to store your maintenance equipment and your food and all of that kind of stuff because you're feeding it from behind, from the back. I would have a 6 foot like hallway behind that tank. I've got all of my 240s, Lisa's tank and my 360 are a foot off the wall. It's not enough, not even close.
Yeah.
As I'm getting
Especially
older,
as we get a little bit older, it's
I'm
like, well,
telling
maybe
you.
when I was 20, I could squeeze back there. Now I'm like, well, let me go get the grabber and that'll give me
yes,
the extra 2 or 3 feet I need.
my body is not getting wider this way, but it's getting wider front to back, and squeezing that back there is not good. But
Welcome
in
to
a room
half a
like
century.
this, I know that's when it really creeps up on you. But in a room like this, if I was to put all of my tanks 2 feet off the wall, it would dramatically decrease the size of the room. So, it's a long, skinny room. But yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because that space behind the tank, listen, even if it's not built into the wall, just having a way to configure your room or whatever to where that tank has plenty of space behind it. Hopefully you never have to go back there, but if you ever do have to go back there, you will be so glad that you planned that room. I think minimum 2 feet, but if we're talking fantasy, I'm going 6. And I'm going to put a dryer back there so I can dry the towels. We're going all in here with this fantasy. I'm going to have a slop sink back there.
It's a laundry room.
Yeah, there you go. A laundry room.
I've seen that a number of times when I've done fish room tours where people have their display tanks, and it's just they built into the wall and their laundry room's right in the back, and it worked out perfectly, absolutely perfectly.
Yep, I love it. So, hey, these are going to be 2 absolutely amazing tanks. I kind of thought you were going to go a different route, and I kind of thought I was going to be able to end this podcast saying, mine's way better than yours, but I don't think it is. I think yours is
put them together.
incredible.
You got 2 awesome display tanks.
That's right. And if you had one on one side of the room and the other on the other side of the room, you're living in heaven right there. That would be a beautiful thing. Of course, you would have to have LeBron James kind of money to be able to do that, but that would be an incredible thing. And I would have so much fun not having to work on it all the time because I set it up properly. I don't mind doing the work, but if we're having a fantasy, I ain't doing anything. So,
Yep.
But this has been so much fun. Let us know if you're, you can't do this if you're listening to this in podcast form, but if you're watching this on YouTube, let us know in the comments what your fantasy aquarium setup would be. You don't need to go into as crazy detail as we've done, but what size, what fish, what filter, what all of that kind of stuff you would do if money is no object. And you can have as much fun talking about this as Jason and I have. So it's been a good time. Do you have any last words that you want to say before we get out of here?
I don't. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. And we will see you next week with another really good topic.